The city was loud that afternoon. It was always loud, but Tuesday afternoons had a particular quality to them, the kind of dense, indifferent noise that came from everyone being exactly where they didn't want to be. Delivery trucks double-parked on both sides of Meridian. A food cart radio playing something nobody had requested. The hollow percussion of scaffolding 2 blocks east where they were always building something or tearing something down, and the sound never changed, only the justification for it. Evelyn Carter counted everything. She had to. 31 steps from the mouth of the subway exit to the corner where the newspaper stand smelled of ink and diesel. 4 steps left to clear the broken slab of pavement she could feel through the rubber tip of her cane before she even reached it. 19 more to the traffic light that beeped twice, always twice, before the walk signal opened. She had mapped this city in counts and textures and sounds until it became hers in a way sighted people never bothered to know it. And today, like every Tuesday, she was doing just fine. Amara was in her left hand. Alina was in her right. 3 years old and fizzing with energy the way only twins could, each one pulling in a different direction, both of them chattering over each other in the garbled, breathless language only they fully understood. Evelyn kept her grip firm and her cane sweeping, counting under her breath. 8 more steps. 7. The awning of the grand residences would be above them by now, she knew it by the way the street noise bounced differently, sharper, enclosed, off the stone facade. 6 steps. 5. Then the siren. Not a wail. A sudden, violent shriek, a police cruiser cutting through a gap in traffic 2 blocks away. Close enough that Evelyn felt it in her sternum. Close enough that Amara screamed. And in the half-second that Evelyn's grip fractionally adjusted, not loosened, just shifted, Alina bolted. Small sneakers slapping against the pavement, a flash of blue puffer jacket pulling hard to the left, toward the glass doors, toward the lobby entrance, toward the men in expensive shoes who were already moving, already forming the invisible wall that people like them built around people like him. Alina, Evelyn's cane swept empty air. Amara was crying now too, tugging back toward her grandmother, but the sound of Alina's footsteps had disappeared into the noise of the street. Disappeared into something heavier. Something that stopped. The sidewalk went quiet. Evelyn had lived in this city for 63 years. She knew what city silence sounded like, the way noise didn't disappear, it held its breath. She heard 3 bodyguards stop mid-step. She heard a car door that had been opening go still. She heard the intake of breath from a doorman who had, in 9 years of employment at the grand residences, never once made a sound. And underneath all of it, she heard something she had not expected, a man's breath catching. Not a growl. Not a command. A catch, the involuntary, unguarded kind that a man makes when something hits him somewhere a bulletproof vest cannot reach. I have her. 2 words. Deep and perfectly level. The voice of a man who had not asked for permission in a very long time, and was not asking now. Evelyn's cane found the ground. She turned toward the voice, chin raised, jaw tight, every nerve in her body cataloging what her eyes could not confirm. The scent hit her first, not cologne exactly, something more restrained, cedar and something cold and clean underneath it, the kind of expensive that didn't announce itself. Then the quality of the silence around him. It wasn't the silence of a bystander. It was the silence of a man everything else in the vicinity had quietly rearranged itself around. She could hear Alina hiccuping. Not screaming anymore. The way a child sounds when they are scared but held, properly held, with a steadiness that reaches the small animal part of a toddler's brain and says, "You are not falling." "Give me my granddaughter," Evelyn said. Her voice did not shake. In 63 years it had never learned how. There was a pause. Not the pause of hesitation. The pause of a man staring at something that had detonated quietly inside his chest and was still deciding what shape the damage would take. When he spoke again, the words were directed at her, but Evelyn had the distinct, skin-prickling impression that they were not entirely meant for her. Where did they come from? Not a question. The syntax was there but the inflection wasn't. It landed like the last piece of something, the closing of a circuit, the click of a lock finding its mechanism after years of the wrong key. Evelyn felt the hairs rise on the back of her neck and could not have explained why. Min Jae Kong was looking at the child in his arms. At the exact architecture of her face. At the shape of her eyes, the precise tilt, the warm depth, the feature he had memorized 3 years ago on a woman he had been told he would never see again. His jaw tightened. One of his bodyguards took a single step forward and Min Jae raised 2 fingers, barely, the smallest possible gesture, and the man stopped as if he'd hit a wall. He looked at the second twin, still clutching the old woman's hand. Then back at the first. His blood. He knew it the way the body knows its own missing piece, not as a thought but as a reckoning. He crouched down, a thing he had never done for anyone, in any room, in any negotiation in his entire adult life, and placed Alina's small hand into Evelyn's waiting one. Carefully. Like the act itself was a covenant. She is safe, he said. Quiet. No performance in it. Then he straightened, and he looked at the 3 of them, the fierce old woman, the 2 hiccuping toddlers, the small improbable unit they made together on the cold city sidewalk outside his building, and something settled in his expression that his own men had never seen there before. Not possession. Not strategy. Certainty. He nodded once to the doorman. Find them a car. Then, to no one in particular, in the tone of a man recording a fact, they won't be leaving unaccompanied. Evelyn Carter had survived this city on instinct for 63 years. Her instinct said, run. Her granddaughter's hiccups were slowing. Alina had gone quiet against her leg. Amara's small fist was still wrapped around her thumb, and some stubborn part of Evelyn registered, against every alarm ringing in her chest, that both children were breathing easier than they had been 30 seconds ago. She did not run. She stood very still, cane planted, and listened to the man who smelled of cedar and expensive silence walk back toward his building. And she counted his steps, old habit, new danger, because in her experience, the things you needed to survive were always the things you paid attention to first. If this story already has your heart, you know what to do. Like this video, drop a comment telling me what you think Min Jae is going to do next, and subscribe so you don't miss a single chapter. This is just the beginning. He sent them home in one of his cars. Evelyn refused it twice. The 3rd time he didn't offer, he simply told the driver, quietly, and the driver pulled forward, and one of his men explained to the old woman that the car was already there and it cost her nothing and the children were tired. She stood rigid on the sidewalk for a long moment, head slightly tilted in that way she had, listening for the lie in it. Then she got in. Not because she trusted it. Because Alina had already stopped crying and Amara was leaning against the window and they were, in fact, tired. Min Jae watched the car until it turned the corner. Then he took out his phone and called his head of security. I need an address. He did not go himself. Not the first night. He sent 2 men he trusted to say nothing and see everything, and what they came back with was an address in the Fenwick district, 4th floor walk-up, 1 elevator that didn't work, a buzzer panel where half the names had been taped over so many times the tape itself had names on it. He looked at the report for a long time. Then he went himself. He stood across the street for 40 minutes the next morning. Coat collar up, hands in his pockets, watching. She came out at 7:43. Both twins in tow, one on each side, Alina in the red jacket and Amara in the one with the broken zipper that had been safety pinned at the collar. Evelyn had a canvas bag over one shoulder and her cane in her right hand, and she was counting again. He could see it in the slight movement of her lips, the deliberate pace, the way her head turned at each decision point like she was reading a map only she could access. He followed them to the market on Crest Street. He watched her navigate the produce section by touch and smell while the twins tried to pull packaged things off shelves, and she redirected them twice, 3 times, a fourth, without raising her voice. He watched her at the register count out bills by fold, the ones she'd creased differently so she'd know them in the dark. He watched the man behind her in line sigh loudly, and something moved through Minjae that was not quite anger and not quite grief. He already knew what he needed to know about the timeline. His people had confirmed it in 12 hours. Yuna had been 4 months pregnant when she disappeared. The twins were 3 now. Someone inside his organization had moved her, hidden her, and when she died, complications, the report said, the kind of word people used when they didn't want to say the rest of it, someone had made sure the children disappeared into the city quietly, into the hands of a blind grandmother with a walk-up apartment and a safety pin holding a small coat closed. Someone had decided he didn't deserve to know. He stood outside the market in the cold and watched Evelyn emerge with her canvas bag and both twins and the particular exhausted straightness of a woman who had been holding everything together for so long she no longer remembered what it felt like to put any of it down. He was going to find out who. He was going to dismantle them thoroughly and without exception. But first, he was going to make sure she never had to count pennies at a register again. Chapter 3. It happened on a Thursday. Evelyn had learned to read streets the way other people read faces, by what they gave off, the temperature of a block, the particular quality of loitering versus moving, the difference between noise that was going somewhere and noise that was waiting. She felt this one before she heard it. A stillness that wasn't natural. Footsteps that had been behind her for half a block and weren't overtaking her the way purposeful footsteps did. She slowed. The twins felt it too, the way children do, some animal frequency adults learn to talk themselves out of. Amara pressed close to her leg. Alina went quiet. Yo. Grandma. 3 of them. Young, she thought, she could hear it in the register, the performance in it, the way boys that age needed an audience even when they were the only ones present. They fanned out slightly. She tracked them by sound without moving her head. We got a rate on this block. Everybody pays. You're a little behind. Evelyn said nothing. She pulled both twins closer and kept her hand tight on her cane and measured the distance to the corner in her head. Too far. The afternoon foot traffic had thinned, she'd stayed at the library longer than usual, lost track of the hour listening to the twins in the children's section. She knew that too, now. She filed it. Lady. You hear me talking to you? I hear you, she said. Even. And I'm telling you, not today. Not any day. One of them laughed. Another stepped closer, she heard the shift of his weight, the scrape of a sole on the pavement, close enough now that she could smell cigarette smoke and something chemical underneath it. Her jaw tightened. Amara made a small sound against her coat. Then a different sound entirely. A car, no, 2, pulling to the curb with the smooth, unhurried certainty of vehicles that never had to rush because everything in their path already moved. Doors opening. Footsteps, several, coordinated, the kind that had learned to land without announcing themselves. The temperature of the block changed completely. She heard the boys recalibrate in real time. The bravado leaving their bodies like air from a puncture. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then one word, from a voice she recognized. Quiet as it had been the first time. Carrying the same weight it had carried on the sidewalk outside the grand residences. Walk away. They walked. Not quickly enough for dignity, but quickly enough that the point was made. She heard them go, heard the shift in the air as the circle around her changed composition entirely, and then she heard him, the soft deliberate sound of his footsteps coming to stand a few feet in front of her. Mrs. Carter. She hadn't told him her name. Which meant he already knew it. Evelyn stood very still. Amara had stopped trembling. Alina, impossibly, had reached out in the direction of his voice. "You've been following us," Evelyn said. Not a question. "Yes." "Since Tuesday." A pause. "Yes." She absorbed that. Turned it over the way she turned everything over, quietly, thoroughly, without showing the work. The canal bag was still on her shoulder. The cane was still in her hand. She did not have the luxury of falling apart on a public street with both twins watching, so she didn't. "What do you want?" she said. He was quiet for a moment in a way that felt, strangely, like the most honest thing he'd done yet. "I want to explain something to you," he said. "And I need you to hear all of it before you respond." She did not agree that night. She didn't agree the next night either, or the one after that. She listened to everything he said, and he had said a great deal, standing on that block with the twins between them and his men at a respectful distance, and then she went home to her fourth-floor walk-up and she lay in the dark and she thought about her daughter, and she thought about the look on his face when he'd held Alina, and she thought about the safety pin on Amara's coat, and she did not sleep. She agreed on the fourth day. She told herself it was temporary. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the grand residences. She knew its dimensions within 2 hours, she counted them, quietly, while Minjae's housekeeper showed her through rooms that absorbed sound the way good money always did, softly and completely. 7 rooms. Heated floors she could feel through her shoes. Windows that Alina immediately ran to and pressed her face against and said, with absolute authority, that she could see everything. It was too much. Evelyn knew it was too much. That was the point, and she resented the point, and she said so. "We don't need this much space," she told him the first evening. She was standing in the kitchen, which was larger than her entire apartment. "You have it anyway," he said, from somewhere to her left. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He did things like that, conceded her point and changed nothing. She found it profoundly irritating in a way she didn't have vocabulary for yet, because it wasn't arrogance exactly, it was more like a man who had decided something and experienced her objections as whether present. Noted. Not particularly relevant to his direction of travel. She told him not to hire someone to walk the twins to the building's play terrace. He hired someone anyway. She told him Amara didn't eat food that was too fancy, her word, fancy, delivered with precision, and the next morning there were plain buttered rolls on the breakfast table next to whatever architectural thing the chef had prepared. A concession, wrapped inside a refusal to fully concede. But then there were the evenings. She heard it first on the third night. She had thought the twins were asleep, but Alina had gotten up, she always got up, she was constitutionally opposed to sleep, and wandered into the main room, and Evelyn had followed the small footsteps to the doorway and stopped. Minjae was sitting on the floor. His jacket was off. Alina was showing him something, a small plastic horse she'd brought from the apartment, her most prized possession, and explaining it to him in the serious, detailed way she explained things, as though the listener's full academic attention was required. He was listening. Completely. With the focused, unguarded stillness of a man who had not sat on a floor in decades and did not know yet that it was changing him. Evelyn stood in the doorway and said nothing. Amara padded past her a moment later, trailing her blanket, and climbed directly into his lap without asking. He went very still, the way people do when something unexpected and fragile lands on them and they're suddenly afraid to move. Then, slowly, his arm came around her. Evelyn went back to bed. She lay in the dark in the heated room with its thick curtains and its complete silence, and she thought, this man is dangerous for entirely different reasons than she'd first assumed. He asked her to sit down on a Sunday morning. The twins were on the play terrace with the woman he'd hired, the one Evelyn had told him not to hire, the one who had turned out to be patient and warm and who Amara had decided was acceptable after a rigorous 2-day evaluation. Evelyn had heard them out there for the past hour, the twins' voices rising and falling, the occasional shriek of pure joy that still caught her off guard sometimes, the way it arrived like proof of something she hadn't let herself fully believe yet. She sat. She folded her hands on the table and waited. He was quiet for a moment in the way she'd come to recognize, not hesitation, exactly, but the particular stillness of a man choosing his entry point into something large and irreversible. Her name was Yuna, he said. Yuna Seo. We were together for 2 years. I was going to marry her. Evelyn said nothing. She knew the name. She had said the name 10,000 times, in hospitals, in prayers, in the dark of the apartment after the twins were asleep. Hearing it in his mouth did something complicated to the air between them. She didn't tell me she was pregnant, he said. I spent a long time being angry about that. I understand now why she didn't. He told her about a man named Daesung. 15 years in Min Jae's organization. Trusted absolutely, the way you only trusted people who had been present at the beginning, who had helped build the thing from its foundations. Daesung had decided, at some point, that Min Jae's heir, any heir, was a threat to the succession he'd been quietly planning for himself. He had people everywhere. He had patience. When he found out about the pregnancy, he moved carefully and he moved early. He had told Yuna that Min Jae wanted her gone. That the child was a liability. That she had 24 hours. Evelyn's hands tightened on the table. He had told Min Jae that Yuna had left. That there had been a complication. That she was gone. He had produced paperwork, the kind of paperwork that existed in the world he operated in, where documents were manufactured with the same efficiency as anything else. Min Jae had grieved. He had grieved for 3 years, cleanly and privately, the way men like him learn to absorb losses that couldn't be shown. And Yuna had gone to the only person she trusted completely, her mother, a blind woman in the Fenwick district with a 4th-floor walk-up and a fierce, immovable love, and she had made it 7 months before her heart gave out in a way that no one had seen coming and everyone should have. The kitchen was very quiet. Evelyn was not crying. She was somewhere beyond crying, in that still, pressurized place where grief had been stored so long it had calcified into something structural. She was alone, she said finally. Her voice was level and devastating. She was alone and she was frightened and she believed him. Yes. She died believing you didn't want her. He didn't answer. She didn't need him to. She could hear it in his silence, not deflection, not defense, just the full unguarded weight of a man absorbing something he could not fix, could not negotiate around, could not make right with money or power or any instrument available to him. Daesung, she said. He's been handled. She absorbed that. Filed it away in the place where she kept things she would think about later, in the dark, when the twins were asleep and she had the privacy to feel the full dimensions of everything. She would have loved them, Evelyn said quietly. Not to him, exactly. To the room. To the morning. I know, he said. And the way he said it, low, careful, like he'd been carrying those 3 words for some time, told her that he had looked at those 2 little girls on the play terrace and seen Yuna in every single thing they did. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she unfolded her hands, placed them flat on the table, and stood up. She had things to consider. Grief to rearrange. A version of the past 3 years that had just been taken apart and rebuilt into something with entirely different implications. At the kitchen doorway she stopped. She would have forgiven you, Evelyn said. Eventually. That was her nature. A pause. I'm not her. She walked back toward the terrace to listen to her granddaughters play, and she left him sitting alone with that, which was, she felt, exactly where it belonged. The whisper moved the way whispers always moved in that world, not from mouth to mouth but through absence. A shift in who returned calls and who didn't. A meeting rescheduled twice and then not at all. Min-jae felt it before his people confirmed it, the way you felt a change in pressure before the weather broke. His head of security put a name to it on a Wednesday. Park Hyun-woo. Rival organization, Eastern Territories, a man who had spent 4 years probing the edges of Min-jae's empire looking for the thing that wasn't there, a weakness, a softness, something human enough to be used. For 4 years he had found nothing. Now he had found something. Min-jae received the intelligence report at 7 in the morning and read it without expression and then sat quietly for 60 seconds, which was the closest he came to visible emotion in professional settings. Then he made 3 calls and doubled the building security and said nothing to Evelyn. He should have said something to Evelyn. The park had been the twins' idea, which meant it had been inevitable. Amara had asked every morning for 6 days with the systematic persistence of a child who understood instinctively that repetition was leverage. Alina had said nothing but had taken to standing by the front door in her coat at random intervals, a silent editorial. Min-jae had held out longer than most people would have. On the 7th morning he looked at both of them at the breakfast table and said, with the gravity of a man renegotiating a treaty, 1 hour. They accepted these terms without magnanimity. He took 4 men. Plain clothes, positioned well. He had done the route assessment himself the night before. The park was 3 blocks from the building, a small manicured square with a fountain the twins immediately identified as the most important thing they had ever seen. Min-jae stood 6 feet back and watched them run toward it and felt something move through him that he had no established category for. Something adjacent to peace, which was not an experience his life had prepared him to recognize quickly. He recognized the car before his men did. A dark sedan, moving at the particular speed of a vehicle that hadn't decided yet whether to stop. His body made the calculation before his mind finished it. He was already moving, already closing the distance to the fountain, already putting himself between the car and the twins, when the window came down. 2 shots. High and left, warning, or incompetence, his mind filed it as the former. A message dressed as an attempt. The park erupted. His men converged. The sedan accelerated and turned hard and was gone in the time it took the twins to register that something loud had happened. Amara looked up at him with enormous eyes. He was crouched in front of them, both arms out, his body a wall between them and the street. His heart was doing something it had not done in years, slamming, uncontrolled, with a ferocity that had nothing to do with the threat to himself. "Are you hurt?" he said. Low and even, because they were watching his face and they would take their cue from it. Amara shook her head. Alina, after a moment, shook hers. He exhaled once. Then he picked them both up, 1 in each arm, their combined weight settling against his chest, and he walked back toward the building without looking behind him because his men were behind him and the calculation was already made and what mattered, what was the only thing that mattered, was that he could feel both of them breathing. By the time they reached the lobby Alina had her face pressed against his shoulder and Amara was telling him, in a voice still wobbling at its edges, about the fountain. How it had 3 tiers. How the top one was the best one. How she wanted to come back. "We'll come back," he said. He meant it. He was also, simultaneously and with complete focus, beginning to dismantle Park Hyun-woo's entire operation in his head. Not out of vengeance. Out of arithmetic. The twins existed in the world now. The world needed to be made smaller and safer and significantly less populated with people who knew that. He got in the elevator and held them all the way to the top floor and did not put them down until Evelyn's voice reached him from down the hall, sharp, already sensing something in the quality of the silence, and then he set them down gently and watched them run toward her and stood in the hallway alone with the specific, clarifying fury of a man who had just learned exactly what he was willing to burn down. Everything, it turned out. He was willing to burn down everything. The power went at 2 a.m. Not a flicker. Not the gradual brownout of an overloaded grid. A clean, deliberate cut, the kind that took preparation and inside knowledge and a specific kind of confidence. The penthouse dropped into absolute darkness between 1 second and the next, and Evelyn was already awake. She had always slept lightly. It was a survival mechanism that had preceded the blindness and intensified after it, her brain refusing to fully relinquish consciousness, keeping one channel open, monitoring. She was sitting up before the darkness registered as unusual, and she knew it was unusual before she could have explained how. The ambient sound of the building had changed. The low electrical hum that most people never consciously heard was gone, and in its absence the silence had a texture to it, dense and deliberate and occupied. She was out of bed and moving before Min-jae's voice came low and urgent through the darkness from the hallway. "Evelyn." "I know," she said. "The twins first." She didn't need a wall to guide her. She had counted this penthouse on the first day and every day since, not out of habit but out of the same instinct that had kept her alive and functional for 20 years without sight. 14 steps to the twins' room. She covered them in 12, moving fast and silent in a way that startled her even now sometimes, the way her body had learned to trust itself in the dark. She found them by sound, Alina's particular sleeping breath, slightly nasal, and Amara's slower and deeper beside her. She put her hand over Amara's mouth gently before she woke her, the signal they had practiced without Min-jae knowing they had practiced it, because Evelyn had known something like this was coming and she had prepared for it the only way she could. Amara's eyes opened. Didn't make a sound. Good girl. She got them both into the closet at the back of the room, deepest corner, and she pressed her lips to Alina's ear and said the word they'd agreed on. Quiet. Alina nodded against her cheek. Then she went back out. Min-jae was in the hallway, and she could hear the problem immediately. 3 men, no, 4, coming up from the service stairwell to the east. She knew the sound of that stairwell, knew the slight reverb it put on footsteps, knew they were 8 seconds out. She could also hear Min-jae turning his head, trying to use eyes that were useless to him right now, eyes that needed light and had none. 4, she said quietly. East stairwell. 8 seconds, maybe less. The one in front favors his left, his right footfall is lighter. He went completely still beside her. Then, how many behind us? She listened. 1. Holding. He's covering the elevator. You're sure? I've been reading rooms by sound for 20 years. Don't second guess me now. A beat. She heard him exhale, not fear, something more like a man recalibrating his entire understanding of the resources available to him. Tell me when, he said. She listened to the stairwell. Counted the footsteps down with the same precision she counted city blocks, the same focus she brought to produce sections and library corridors and everything else the world expected her to navigate alone. The sound sharpened. Clarified. The door at the end of the hall had a specific resistance to it, she'd noted it the first week, how it caught slightly before it opened. She heard it catch. Now, she said. First one is yours. Second is 2 steps behind him, slightly right. What happened next she tracked entirely by sound, the collision of bodies, the specific percussion of a fight conducted by a man who knew exactly where to put his hands because someone was telling him. She stayed low against the wall, one hand on the door behind her, and she called it like coordinates. Left. Down. Behind you, stop, step back, let him come through. It lasted less than 90 seconds. When it was over she heard 4 people on the floor and 1 man breathing hard in the dark beside her. She heard him turn toward her and she heard something in his breathing she hadn't heard there before, not gratitude exactly, something rawer than that, the involuntary sound of a man who had just been kept alive by someone he had fundamentally underestimated. Then she remembered the one at the elevator. "The last one," she said. "Handled," said a voice from the far end of the hall. "His head of security." She heard 2 more of his men come through behind, the cavalry, a minute late but present. The emergency lighting came on. Dim and red and apparently irrelevant to her. She heard Min-jae lean against the wall beside her. "The twins," he said. "Closet. Back corner. They're fine." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said her name, not as an address, just her name, the 2 syllables of it, as though he was reminding himself of something important. She was already moving toward the twins' room. "You can thank me in the morning," she said. "Right now I need to go tell 2 3-year-olds that the loud noises were nothing." She counted the steps in the red-tinged dark. 14. She'd gotten it right both times. She always got it right. He made the calls on a Monday. Evelyn heard him from the kitchen, not the words, the tone. The particular register of a man who was not negotiating but dictating the terms of a negotiation others didn't yet know was already concluded. She had learned his vocal landscape the way she learned everything, by paying attention longer and more carefully than anyone expected her to. She knew his professional voice, which was level and almost bored. She knew the voice he used with the twins, which was something she suspected no one outside this penthouse had ever heard, quieter, slower, with a patience in it that seemed to surprise even him. The voice she heard on Monday was different from both. It was the voice of a man who had made a decision that was going to cost him enormously and had moved, in his own interior, to the other side of it already. She said nothing. She made tea and she waited. The summit took place on a Thursday, in a building Min-jae owned outright, a fact he had made certain everyone present was aware of, because the geography of a room was its own language and he had spoken it fluently his entire adult life. 7 organizations. 4 cities. People who had spent years watching for the seam in him, the place where he could be pried open. They had found it. He had decided to use that against them in the only way they wouldn't see coming. He gave them everything. Not under duress. Not as a loss. He laid it out the way he laid out everything, methodically, without performance, with the specific unhurried authority of a man who had already decided that the thing he was surrendering was worth less than the thing he was protecting. Territories, redistricted. Holdings, transferred. The infrastructure of 15 years, parceled out with the same precision it had been built. He had spent a week on the documents. They were immaculate. Park Hyun-woo sat across the table and watched him with the suspicious attention of someone waiting for the trap to spring. It didn't spring. That was the trap. A man with nothing to protect was dangerous. A man who had chosen what to protect, who had drawn the circle and stepped inside it and sealed it behind him, was something else entirely. Something none of the men in that room had a reliable framework for, because none of them had ever wanted anything more than the empire itself. Min-jae had. He just hadn't known it until a 3-year-old pressed a plastic horse into his hand and looked at him like he was someone worth explaining things to. He came home at 9 in the evening. The twins were asleep. Evelyn was in the main room, hands folded, facing the window in the way she sometimes did, not seeing it, but oriented toward it, the way people faced the direction of things that mattered. "It's done," he said. She was quiet for a moment. All of it. All of it. She absorbed that. He watched her process it, the slight shift in her shoulders, the breath she took that was marginally deeper than the one before it. "And the people who came through that hallway," she said. And the ones who sent them? Handled, he said. Permanently. She nodded once. Not approval exactly. Evelyn Carter did not traffic in easy approval. He had learned that early and respected it more than he'd expected to. It was something closer to acknowledgement. The recognition that a thing had been done that needed doing and had been done completely. Amara asked about you at dinner, she said. She wanted to know if you were coming back. He stood in the doorway of his own penthouse and felt the full weight of that sentence, the smallness of it, the enormity of it, the fact that a 3-year-old's dinner-time question had just articulated the only thing that had mattered for the past 6 weeks with more precision than any document he'd signed today. What did you tell her? He said. Evelyn unfolded her hands. Stood up. Moved toward the hallway with the unhurried certainty of a woman navigating a space she knew completely. I told her yes, she said, without turning around. I told her you were coming back. She had not, he noted, told him whether she had believed it when she said it. He thought, as he stood in the quiet of the room that had become the center of something he didn't have a word for yet, that she probably had. 6 months later, Evelyn stopped counting steps. Not all at once. Not as a decision, exactly, more as a thing she noticed one morning, already halfway down the hallway to the kitchen, that she had arrived without numbering the distance. She stood still for a moment and took stock of that. The hallway was 14 steps. She knew it was 14 steps. She simply hadn't needed to say so, even internally, because some part of her had accepted without announcement that she was not going to get lost here. That the floor beneath her was reliable. That nothing was going to change between one morning and the next without her being told. She wasn't sure when she had started trusting that. She filed it away and went to make tea. The house was in a quiet suburb 40 minutes from the city, not hiding exactly, but settled, the way a thing is settled when it has been chosen deliberately rather than arrived at by default. It had a garden that Amara had claimed immediately and Alina had declared less interesting than the upstairs window, from which she had concluded you could see, depending on the season, a significant portion of the known world. It had a kitchen with a layout Evelyn had been consulted on before anything was finalized, a fact Min Jae had presented without ceremony, simply spreading what she'd assumed were documents on the table one afternoon and asking her to run her hands over the raised line blueprint his architect had prepared. She had done so without speaking for a long time. Then she had moved the stove 2 feet to the left, which he had relayed without question, and that had been that. She had her own room. Her own bathroom. A small sitting area with a window she could feel the morning sun through, which was the only feature she had requested for herself and which she suspected he had remembered from one offhand sentence 6 weeks before she said it. He was not a man who forgot things. She had made her peace with that. On a Saturday in early autumn she sat on the back steps and listened to the garden. Amara was narrating an elaborate scenario involving 3 plastic horses and a disputed territory of flower beds. Alina was pushing back on the terms of the scenario with the focused jurisprudence of a child who had strong opinions about narrative fairness. Their voices rose and fell and tangled together and separated, and Evelyn followed it all without effort, the way you follow music you know well. She heard the back door open behind her. His footsteps, she had known them for months now, the particular weight and rhythm of them, unhurried in a way they hadn't been in the beginning. He sat down on the step beside her. Not close enough to crowd her. Close enough to be present. She had noted, over the months, that he had learned the difference. They sat in silence for a while. In the garden, Amara's diplomatic situation was deteriorating. Alina had introduced new evidence. She's going to win, Evelyn said. Alina, he said. Not a question. Alina, she confirmed. A pause. Amara's voice rose with the particular indignation of someone who had just had their argument structurally dismantled by a 3-year-old. Then laughter, both of them, dissolving the way twins dissolved arguments, suddenly and completely, moving on to something else with the fluid amnesia of the very young. Evelyn listened to them laugh and felt something move through her chest that she recognized, after a moment, as the specific relief of a woman who had been holding her breath for 3 years and had finally, in the presence of these steps and this garden and this particular silence beside her, let it out. She thought about Una. She did that every day, would do it every day for the rest of her life, and she had accepted that the grief and the gratitude lived in the same place now, that the twins were both the wound and the salve of it, and that this man beside her was, improbably and irreversibly, part of the same equation. She had not forgiven him. She had told him so, clearly, and he had not asked her to. But she had arrived, somewhere in the last 6 months, at something adjacent to it, a willingness to build forward rather than stand still in the rubble of what had been lost. It was not the same thing as forgiveness. It was, perhaps, its own thing entirely. She would have liked this house, Evelyn said. He didn't answer immediately. She hadn't expected him to. Yes, he said finally. Quietly. The same way he'd said everything that mattered, without embellishment, without defense, just the word itself, placed carefully into the air between them like something he meant to stay there. In the garden, Amara was explaining the new terms of the treaty. Alina was listening with visible skepticism. The autumn light was doing something warm on Evelyn's face and she turned toward it slightly, the way she always did, and she listened to her granddaughters and she breathed and she let the morning be, for once, simply what it was. Whole. Quiet. Enough. The end. If this story moved you, if you saw something in Evelyn's strength, or in the moment Min Jae sat down on that floor, let me know in the comments. Those messages matter more than you know. Like this video, subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after they're over, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that family finds you in the most unexpected places. See you in the next one.